Tonight, as you rest, we travel back to a time of crowns and stone castles, where power felt heavy, fear lived quietly, and even kings slept lightly. This is the strange and very human life of medieval royalty. Imagine standing quietly before a medieval castle. The morning is still young. A pale gray mist drifts slowly across thick stone walls. Walls that have stood in silence for hundreds of years. There is no music. No cheering crowd. No golden glow from fairy tales. Only the sound of wind, moving gently through narrow openings in the stone, and the distant cry of a bird waking with the day. This is where many people believe power once lived. When we think of medieval royalty, we often imagine kings dressed in shining robes, queens wearing jeweled crowns, and grand halls filled with laughter, music, an endless feast. It is a beautiful image. And for centuries, it has been repeated in stories, paintings, and films. But the real life of royalty in medieval times was very different. Much quieter, much heavier, and in many ways, far stranger than most people realize. Tonight, as you rest and listen, we will gently open the gates of this old world together. Not to rush, not to shock, but to slowly walk inside and see what life was truly like for those born into crowns and power. Because behind the stone walls, behind the titles and ceremonies, royal life was not easy. In fact, for many kings, queens, princes, and princesses, their lives were carefully controlled from the very first day they were born. From the outside, royalty seemed to have everything. But on the inside, they had very little freedom. The medieval castle was not a home in the way we understand a home today. It was cold. It was dark. And it was always watching. Stone walls do not keep warmth well. In winter, the cold crept into every room, every hallway, every bed. Fireplaces burned, but they rarely warmed the entire space. Heavy curtains helped only a little, and thick clothing was worn almost all the time, even indoors. Privacy, something we now consider normal, was almost non-existent. Royal chambers were filled with servants. Guards stood near doors day and night. Advisors came and went without warning. Even moments that should have been personal were often shared with others. Nothing truly belonged only to the king or queen. Not their time, not their space, not even their thoughts. Every action had meaning. Every word was noticed. Every silence could be dangerous. To be born into royalty was not simply to inherit power. It was to inherit expectations, rules, and a life already planned. From the moment a royal child entered the world, their life no longer belonged to them. Their name had already been chosen. Their future spouse was often decided years in advance. Their education was planned down to the smallest detail. Love, choice, and personal desire were considered less important than duty. And duty, in medieval times, was everything. Many royal children did not grow up with their parents. Instead, they were raised by caretakers and tutors, taught how to walk, speak, and sit properly before they were taught how to play. Games were limited. Laughter was controlled. Even smiles were sometimes corrected to appear more appropriate. A royal child learned early that their body did not fully belong to them. It represented the kingdom. The family name, the future of alliances and power. Mistakes were not small. Mistakes were remembered as these children grew older. The walls around them seemed to grow taller, not just the stone walls of the castle, but invisible walls made of tradition, religion, and fear. Fear of failure, fear of illness, fear of betrayal, fear of death. In medieval times, death was never far away. Disease moved quietly through cities and courts alike. Medical knowledge was limited. Treatments were often painful and sometimes made things worse. Even royalty, with all their wealth, could not escape sickness. In fact, being royal sometimes made it more dangerous. Poison was a constant worry. Food was tested. Drinks were watched carefully. Trust was fragile. A friendly smile could hide dangerous intentions. So kings and queens lived carefully, always aware that power attracted enemies. Even sleep, the most natural human need, was not truly peaceful. Royal beds were large and heavy, often placed high above the floor, but they were rarely private. Guards slept nearby. Servants stayed within calling distance. In some courts, witnesses were present even during bedtime rituals. The idea of being alone, truly alone, was rare. And yet, despite being surrounded by people, royalty was often deeply lonely. They could not speak freely. They could not trust easily. They could not leave when they wished. A king could command armies, but not his own schedule. A queen could influence nations, but not her own marriage. Power, in medieval times, came with invisible chains, and these chains were considered normal. This was simply the way things were. Religion played a powerful role in shaping royal life. God was believed to choose kings and queens. Their rule was considered sacred. And with that belief came enormous pressure. If something went wrong, a failed harvest, a lost war, a spreading illness, it was often seen as a sign of divine punishment. Royalty lived under constant spiritual weight. They prayed often. They confessed frequently. They feared eternal judgment as much as earthly rebellion. To rule was not only a political responsibility, but a spiritual burden. And yet, despite all of this, the image of royalty remained carefully polished. Ceremonies were grand. Clothing was rich and symbolic. Public appearances were designed to impress and reassure. The strange truth is this: the more powerful royalty appeared in public, the more controlled their private lives became. Behind the throne, behind the crown, behind the carefully rehearsed gestures, there was a human being trying to survive within strict limits. A human being who felt cold, who felt fear, who longed for rest. As we move forward in this story, we will explore the many strange details of royal life, the unusual routines, the uncomfortable clothing, the odd beliefs, the silent fears, not to judge them, not to mock them, but to understand, because medieval royalty was not strange by accident. It was strange because it was built on control, tradition, and survival in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. For now, as the castle gates slowly open, let your mind relax. The stone walls will remain standing. The torches will continue to flicker softly, and we will take our time, moving gently through history, one quiet step at a time. You are safe here. There is no rush. and the story has only just begun. In medieval times, being born into royalty was not a celebration of freedom. It was the beginning of a life already decided. A royal child entered the world surrounded by quiet expectation, not warmth. The room was filled with attendants, midwives, and witnesses, not just to help with the birth, but to make sure everything was done correctly. Everything mattered. Every detail, every breath. From the very first moments, the child was no longer only a child. He or she was an heir, a symbol, a future ruler. The mother often rested only briefly before the child was taken away, not out of cruelty, but tradition. Royal infants were commonly given to wet nurses, women chosen carefully to feed and raise them. It was believed this made the child stronger, healthier, more suitable for rule. The bond between mother and child, something we now see as natural, was considered less important than duty and survival. The royal nursery was quiet and controlled. Crying was discouraged. Movements were watched. Schedules were strict. Warmth was limited, as it was believed that hardship built strength. From a very young age, royal children learned that comfort was not a priority. Even clothing was chosen carefully. Heavy fabrics, tight shapes, layers that restricted movement. The purpose was not ease, but appearance. To look royal was more important than to feel comfortable. Playtime, when allowed, was structured. Games were chosen for discipline, not joy. A child might learn to hold a small wooden sword before learning to run freely. Princes might practice sitting still for long periods before she learned to laugh without restraint. Every movement was observed, every habit corrected. Tutors entered their lives early. Reading, writing, religion, and history were introduced as duties, not curiosities. Mistakes were quietly noted. Progress was expected. Praise was rare. Correction was constant. A royal child learned quickly that approval came from obedience. Love, when present, was subtle. Hugs were limited. Affection was formal. It was believed that too much tenderness made a ruler weak. Instead, children were taught respect, distance, and self-control. As the years passed, the weight of expectation grew heavier. Royal children were reminded, often, of who they were and what they represented. You are not like others. They were told, and it was true. They did not eat with common children. They did not learn freely. They did not choose their companions. Friends were selected carefully. Every interaction was monitored. Loneliness was common, even in busy castles. Many royal children spent long hours alone in large stone rooms, listening to the echo of their own footsteps. Windows were high. Views were distant. The outside world felt far away. Illness was a constant fear. Medieval medicine was limited. Small fevers could become deadly. Royal children were watched closely for signs of weakness. Treatments were often uncomfortable, sometimes painful. Bloodletting, herbal mixtures, and strange remedies were used in the hope of balance. Fear surrounded sickness. If a child became ill, the court grew tense. An heir's health meant the kingdom's future. Because of this, royal children lived carefully. Fresh air was limited. Contact with outsiders was controlled. Protection came at the cost of freedom. As they grew older, Lessons became stricter. Boys trained for leadership and war. They studied strategy, law, and diplomacy. Physical training was demanding. Cold mornings, heavy armor, endless repetition. Pain was seen as preparation. Girls were trained for marriage. And alliance. They learned household management, religion, and court behavior. Music and embroidery were valued, but obedience was valued more. They were taught how to speak softly, how to listen carefully, and how to hide emotion. Marriage was discussed early. Sometimes before a child could fully understand the word. A royal future was not a mystery. It was a contract. Despite all this, royal children were still children. They felt fear. They felt curiosity. They felt longing, but they learned quickly to hide these feelings. Tears were private. Questions were risky. Silence was safer. Many royal children grew up never knowing what it meant to make a simple choice. What to wear, where to go, who to trust. Every decision belonged to the crown. Even bedtime followed ritual. Prayers were recited carefully. Servants checked candles and doors. Guards stood nearby. Sleep came slowly, often interrupted by fear or cold. Dreams, when they came, were quiet escapes. And yet, this strange upbringing was considered ideal. It created rulers who obeyed tradition, who understood control, who accepted sacrifice. By the time a royal child reached adulthood, they were no longer simply a person. They were a role, a symbol of continuity in a fragile world. A world where power could disappear overnight. This childhood, so distant from our own, was the foundation of medieval royalty. It shaped their habits, their fears, their strange customs. And as we continue, we will see how these early years followed them into adult life. For now, let the quiet halls of the nursery fade. The footsteps of servants grow distant. The heavy doors close softly. The child sleeps, not knowing what lies ahead, and the story moves gently forward. A medieval castle looks strong and beautiful from a distance. High stone walls, tall towers, wide gates made of wood and iron. It was built to impress, to protect, and to remind everyone who held power. But living inside a castle was very different from simply looking at one. For royalty, the castle was not a place of comfort. It was a place of duty. Stone was everywhere. Stone floors, stone walls, stone ceilings. Stone does not hold warmth. In winter, cold moved slowly through the castle, settling into every room. Even in summer, many chambers felt cool and damp. Fireplaces burned day and night, but their warmth stayed close to the flame. Large rooms were difficult to heat. Smoke filled the air. Soot darkened the walls. The smell of firewood was always present. Royal bedrooms were large, but not cozy. High ceilings made rooms echo. Voices carried far. Privacy was rare. Servants moved quietly through corridors at all hours. Guards stood watch near doors and stairways. The sound of footsteps was never far away. A king or queen was never truly alone. The castle followed a strict daily rhythm. Bells marked time. Prayers divided the day. Meals arrived according to schedule. Life moved slowly, but it was tightly controlled. Royal families did not live in one castle forever. They traveled often. moving between different residences throughout the year. This was partly for politics, and partly for survival. Castles became dirty over time. Waste was difficult to manage. Fresh food was not always available. So when conditions grew unpleasant, the court moved on. Travel was tiring. Roads were rough. Journeys were slow. Royalty traveled with large groups of servants, guards, and supplies. It was not peaceful. Inside the castle, space was shared. Large halls served many purposes. During the day, they were places for meetings and meals. At night, they sometimes became sleeping areas. Beds were not always private. Curtains offered only partial separation. Royal beds were raised high, often with thick wooden frames. Heavy curtains surrounded them, not for decoration but to block cold air. Even so, drafts found their way inside. Silence was rare. The wind howled outside. Doors creaked. Animals moved nearby. Castles were home to more than people. Dogs, cats, and sometimes livestock shared the space. The smell of animals mixed with smoke and damp stone. Cleanliness, by modern standards, was limited. Floors were covered with rushes or straw. These were changed, but not often enough. Food scraps fell. Spills remained. Over time, these materials absorbed odors. Royalty lived surrounded by these smells. Lighting was dimmed. Windows were small, designed for defense, not sunlight. Most light came from candles and torches. Their flames flickered, casting long shadows on stone walls. At night, the castle felt alive. Shadows moved. Sounds echoed. Many people found this unsettling. Even those who grew up in castles never fully became comfortable with the darkness. Royal chambers were often decorated with tapestries. These served two purposes. They showed wealth and power, and they helped keep rooms slightly warmer. Tapestries told stories of battles, family history, and religious scenes. They reminded royalty constantly of their responsibilities. The castle was also a place of constant observation. Servants watched everything, not out of curiosity, but necessity. Royalty relied on servants for nearly everything. Food, clothing, security. But this also meant that personal moments were rarely private. A king dressing in the morning was assisted by many hands. A queen's daily routine was known too. Everyone around her. Secrets were difficult to keep. And in a world of political danger, this created anxiety. Doors were locked carefully. Keys were guarded. Guards rotated shifts day and night. Still, fear remained. Castles were targets. They symbolized power. Enemies wanted inside. So life within the walls was lived carefully. Royal children learned early to stay within certain areas. Some staircases were forbidden. Some rooms were restricted. The castle was large, but freedom inside, it was limited. Windows offered views of the outside world. Fields, forests, villages. For many royals, these views became symbols of distance. The world beyond the walls felt close, yet unreachable. The castle also followed the rhythm of religion. Chapel bells rang regularly. Prayers were expected. Religious spaces were central. The castle chapel was one of the most important rooms. It reminded everyone that even royalty answered to. God.time moved differently inside a castle. Days blended together. Ceremonies repeated. Meals followed the same order. Change came slowly. This created a strange sense of stillness. Life felt frozen, even as history moved forward outside. For visitors, the castle seemed impressive. For those who lived there, it often felt heavy. The walls that protected them also confined them. The same stones that symbolized strength also held cold and silence. A castle was never just a building. It was a system, a place where power lived, but comfort was limited. A place designed for survival, not peace. As night fell, candles were extinguished one by one. Corridors grew darker. Guards took their positions. The castle settled into uneasy rest. Within its walls, royalty lay awake, listening to the sounds of stone, wind, and distant footsteps. Tomorrow would be the same. Another day of duty. Another day inside walls that never moved. And slowly, the castle breathed in the darkness, holding its secrets until morning came again. Clothing was one of the clearest signs of power in medieval royal life. Before a king spoke, before a queen entered a room, their clothing had already delivered a message. It said who they were. It said where they stood. It said who they ruled. But these beautiful garments came with a quiet cost. Royal clothing was not designed for comfort, that it was designed for meaning. Every morning, dressing was a careful ritual. Servants entered the chamber slowly, carrying layers of fabric, each one chosen for the day. A royal person did not dress alone. Hands adjusted sleeves. Hands tightened laces. Hands fastened heavy pieces of cloth around the body. It could take a long time to be fully dressed. First came the inner layers. Linen shirts, often stiff and thick, covered the skin. These absorbed sweat and protected the outer garments. Next came heavier layers. Wool, velvet, and silk were common among royalty. These fabrics were expensive and difficult to clean. They were symbols of wealth. Then came the outer garments. Long robes, wide sleeves, flowing shapes. For kings, these garments were often trimmed with fur. For queens, they were carefully shaped to display status and modesty. At the same time, movement was restricted. Walking required practice. Sitting required care. Turning too quickly could cause fabric to catch or twist. Yet this was expected. Grace in royal life meant control. Control of the body, control of movement, control of expression. Jewelry completed the appearance. Chains of gold rested heavily on the chest. Rings covered fingers. Brooches fastened cloaks. These pieces were not light. Wearing them for hours could be tiring, but removing them in public was unthinkable. They were part of the role. Crowns were especially uncomfortable. Despite their beauty, they were heavy and awkward. Some pressed against the head painfully. Others required careful balance. Kings and queens trained themselves to hold their heads perfectly still. A slight movement could cause embarrassment. Shoes were another challenge. Royal footwear was often stiff, with narrow shapes and hard soles. Walking on stone floors was not gentle on the feet. Yet, these shoes were worn daily. Comfort was not the goal. Appearance was. Color mattered greatly. Bright dyes were expensive and rare. Red, purple, and deep blue were associated with power. Some colors were legally restricted. Only royalty could wear certain shades. Clothing became a form of language. Without speaking, it told others how to behave. A servant knew when to bow. A visitor knew when to keep distance. But living inside these garments was exhausting. Royal clothing trapped heat in summer and offered little warmth in winter. Breathing could feel restricted. Sitting for long periods caused discomfort. Yet complaints were not encouraged. Pain was seen as a small price for dignity. Clothing also followed strict rules. What to wear depended on the time of day, the event, and the presence of others. Mistakes were noticed. Wearing the wrong garment could be interpreted as disrespect or weakness. So royals relied heavily on their attendants. These servants knew the rules. They selected fabrics. They prepared outfits. They ensured everything appeared correct. This created dependence. A king might rule nations, but he could not dress himself fully. A queen might influence politics, but she needed assistance to move freely. Clothing became a quiet reminder of how little personal control existed. Children of royalty also wore heavy, formal clothing. Even at a young age, they were dressed like adults. Soft fabrics were rare. Learning to move carefully began early. Play was limited by clothing. Running, climbing, and falling were discouraged. Instead, children learned to stand, to walk, and to sit with precision. Mistakes were corrected gently but firmly. Clothing shaped behavior. It taught patience. It taught restraint. In many ways. It taught obedience. At night, royalty removed these layers slowly. Servants helped again. The body, finally free, often showed signs of strained. Marks from tight garments, sore shoulders, tired muscles. But by morning, the ritual began again. Cleanliness was limited. Garments were difficult to wash. Water was scarce. Fabrics were delicate. So clothing was aired, brushed, and reused. Scents were applied to hide odors. Perfumes made from flowers and herbs were common. They created a pleasant illusion. But beneath the layers, discomfort remained. Despite this, royal clothing was admired. Visitors saw only the surface. They saw beauty, color, and elegance. They did not see the effort. They did not feel the weight. They did not experience the restriction. Clothing helped maintain distance between royalty and others. It reminded everyone that these people lived differently. Yet inside the garments, royalty was human. They felt heat. They felt cold. They felt pain. They simply learned not to show it. As the day ended, the castle grew quieter. Candles dimmed. Rooms cooled. The heavy garments rested on wooden stands, waiting for another day. And the royal body, finally unburdened, lay down to rest. But even in sleep, the weight of appearance never fully disappeared. Tomorrow, the clothes would return. And with them, the role. The crown was never removed. It was simply set aside until morning. In stories and paintings, royal meals in medieval times looked joyful and rich. Long wooden tables, golden plates, endless food. Music fills the hall. Laughter echoes through the room. But the real experience of eating as medieval royalty was very different. For a king or queen, A meal was not simply about hunger. It was a public event. It was a display of order, power, and control. The great hall was prepared carefully. Servants moved quietly, laying cloths, arranging plates, and placing heavy cups on the table. Everything followed tradition. The seating was planned. Who sat close to the king mattered. Who sat far away mattered too. Every position sent a message. When royalty entered the hall, everyone stood. Silence followed. The meal did not begin until the highest-ranking person gave a signal. Food arrived in courses. Large platters were carried in, steaming and heavy. Roasted meats were common. Beef, pork, and game filled the air with strong smells. Fish appeared often, especially on religious days. Vegetables were present, but they were not the main focus. Spices played an important role. Pepper, cloves, and cinnamon were used generously, not always for taste, but to show wealth. Spices were expensive. Using them meant power. They also helped hide the flavor of food that was not completely fresh. Food preservation was difficult. Without refrigeration, meat did not last long. Salt and smoke helped, but flavor changed quickly. Strong seasoning became necessary. Royal food looked impressive, but it was not always pleasant. The table itself was busy. Servants moved constantly. They poured drinks, cut meat, and removed dishes. Royalty rarely touched food directly. Knives were sharp, but forks were uncommon. Hands were used. Bowls of water were provided for cleaning fingers. Cleanliness, by modern standards, was limited. Drinks flowed freely. Wine and ale were common. Water was not always safe. Alcohol was often the safer choice. Royal cups were watched carefully. Poison was a constant fear. Food tasters were employed. They ate small portions first to ensure safety. Even with these precautions, worry remained. A strange silence often filled the hall. Conversation was controlled. Only certain people could speak freely. Laughter was measured. Royalty ate slowly, aware of being watched. Every bite was observed. Eating habits were judged. Too fast seemed rude. Too slow seemed weak. Everything had meaning. Royal children attended these meals early. They learned how to sit properly, how to eat carefully, how to remain quiet. Mistakes were corrected gently but firmly. Meals were lessons. They taught patience. They taught awareness. They taught restraint. Food was abundant, yet enjoyment was limited. Royalty often ate not what they preferred, but what tradition required. Religious rules shaped meals. Certain days forbade meat. Fasting was expected. Even kings obeyed these rules. Hunger became part of discipline. Servants, watching closely, remembered everything. They noticed preferences. They noticed habits. This information held value. Knowing what a king liked to eat could mean influence. Knowing what he avoided could mean opportunity. Meals were long. Hours passed slowly. Heavy food made bodies tired. After eating, royalty often felt uncomfortable. Digestion was difficult. Medical knowledge was limited. Overeating was common, yet moderation was rarely practiced. Despite this, meals continued daily. They were necessary performances. They reassured guests that the kingdom was stable, that the crown was strong. Behind the scenes, kitchens worked constantly. Large fires burned. Animals were prepared. Work was intense. The smell of cooking filled lower levels of the castle. Royalty rarely saw this effort. They saw only the finished display. When meals ended, servants cleared the tables. Leftovers were distributed to lower ranks. Nothing was wasted. As the hall emptied, quiet returned. The heavy table stood bare. The echoes faded. Royalty moved on to the next duty. Eating, like everything else in royal life, was not private. It was not simple. It was a ritual. A performance repeated every day. For many kings and queens, meals were tiring. They ate because they must, not because they wished. In the stillness that followed, the body slowed. Fatigue settled in. And as night approached, the castle prepared for rest. But even then, the memory of the table remained. Another meal awaited tomorrow. Another careful performance. And the royal life continued, one controlled moment at a time. When night fell over a medieval castle, darkness did not bring peace. For royalty, sleep was not a quiet escape, it was another part of duty. As the sun disappeared beyond the stone walls, servants began their evening routines. Candles were lit carefully. Torches were placed along corridors. Heavy doors were checked and secured. The castle grew quieter, but it never truly slept. Royal bedrooms were large and imposing. High ceilings stretched above heavy wooden beams. Stone walls held the cold of the day. Even in summer, the air often felt cool and still. Beds were placed high above the floor. They were built with thick wooden frames, sometimes decorated with carvings or symbols of power. Curtains surrounded the bed on all sides. These were not for beauty. They were meant to keep warmth close and block cold air moving through the room. The mattress itself was firm. It was often filled with straw, wool, or feathers. Comfort, by modern standards, was limited. Royalty did not prepare for sleep alone. Servants entered quietly, helping remove heavy garments worn throughout the day. Layers were loosened. Jewelry was taken away. Crowns were carefully placed aside. This process took time. A king or queen could not simply lie down when tired. Everything followed ritual. Night clothing was simple compared to daytime wear, but it was still formal. Long linen garments covered the body. Warmth mattered more than ease. Before sleep, prayers were said. Religion shaped every part of life, and night was no exception. Royalty prayed for protection, for guidance, for forgiveness. They believed sleep left the soul. Vulnerable. Dreams were often seen as messages, warnings, signs from God. So prayers were serious and focused. Even after prayers ended, royalty was rarely alone. Guards remained nearby. They stood outside doors or slept just beyond the chamber. In some courts, trusted servants stayed inside the room itself. This was for safety. Royal life carried constant danger. Assassination was a real fear. Poison was not the only threat. Nighttime attacks were possible. So sleep happened under watchful eyes. Privacy, even in rest, was limited. The presence of others made true relaxation difficult. Royalty learned to sleep despite being observed. The sounds of the castle continued through the night. Footsteps echoed in distant corridors. Doors creaked softly. Wind pressed against narrow windows. Animals moved below. Dogs guarded entrances. Horses shifted in their stalls. The castle never became silent. For many royals, This made sleep shallow. They rested lightly, always half aware. Dreams were often interrupted. Fear played a role. Kings worried about rebellion. Queens worried about heirs. Princes worried about expectation. The weight of responsibility followed them into sleep. Even the bed itself symbolized power. Royal beds were sometimes shown to visitors. They were part of the image of authority. To see where a king slept was considered an honor. This meant that the bed was not a private object. It belonged to the crown, not the person. Royal children experienced this early. They were taught bedtime routines from a young age. Prayers, silence, sleep was controlled. Children were not allowed to roam freely at night. Their chambers were watched. Safety mattered, but so did discipline. Bedtime was not flexible. It followed strict rules. Illness made nights more difficult. When royalty became sick, sleep was restless. Doctors were summoned. Treatments were applied, often painful or uncomfortable. Bloodletting, herbs, and strong-smelling mixtures filled the air. Sleep became impossible. Fear increased. Sickness could mean death. Even a simple fever could end a royal line. So nights were tense. Servants stayed alert. Guards increased their watch. Sleep, already fragile, became rare. Royal marriages affected sleep as well. Many royal couples did not share beds regularly. Marriages were political. Affection was not guaranteed. Sometimes spouses slept in separate chambers. When they did share a bed, it was often for duty. To produce heirs. These moments were rarely private. Witnesses sometimes waited nearby to confirm the event. This made intimacy uncomfortable. Sleep afterward was distant and awkward. Loneliness was common. Despite being surrounded by people, royalty often felt isolated at night. Thoughts grew louder in the dark. Questions surfaced. Was the kingdom safe? Was loyalty real? Was tomorrow certain? There was no escape from these thoughts. A crown could not be removed from the mind. Even sleep was. Political. Dreams could be discussed in the morning. Some believed dreams carried meaning. Troubling dream might cause concern. Advisors listened carefully. Decisions could be influenced by what a king dreamed. So even the unconscious mind was not fully free. Morning came early. Royalty did not sleep late. Bells rang. Servants entered. Curtains were drawn back. Light returned to stone rooms. The night ended, often too quickly. Bodies felt tired. Rest had been shallow. Yet the day began immediately. There was no choice. Sleep, for medieval royalty, was not a refuge. It was another controlled space. Another moment shaped by fear, ritual, and responsibility. And yet, within these limits, royalty learned to endure. They rested when they could. They adapted. The human body adjusted, even under pressure. As the castle moved into morning, the bed stood empty again. Curtains still. Linen cool. Another night would come. Another careful rest. And the quiet struggle of sleep would continue beneath stone ceilings and watchful eyes. When we imagine royalty, we often imagine cleanliness, freshness, and luxury. But in medieval times, ideas about hygiene were very different. For kings and queens, being clean did not mean what it means today. Water was not always trusted. Many people believed that frequent bathing weakened the body. Some thought water opened the skin and allowed illness to enter. Because of this, full baths were rare, even among royalty. Instead of bathing, cleanliness focused on clothing and appearance. Linen undergarments were worn close to the skin. These absorbed sweat and were changed more often than outer clothing. This was considered proper hygiene. The body itself was washed only occasionally. Hands and faces were cleaned more regularly, especially before meals and prayers. But the rest of the body was often left untouched for long periods. Bathing, when it happened, was a major event. Large wooden tubs were prepared. Water was heated slowly over open fires. Herbs and flowers were sometimes added to improve the smell. These baths were usually taken in private rooms, with servants assisting. Privacy was limited. Baths were not relaxing escapes. They were brief and practical. After bathing, the body was dried quickly to avoid catching cold. Cold air was feared. Royalty believed chill led to sickness. So warmth was valued. Perfume played an important role. Scents were used to cover natural body odors. Rosewater, lavender, and other herbal mixtures were common. These were applied to skin, hair, and clothing. Smell was managed, not removed. Hair care was also limited. Hair was washed infrequently. Instead, it was brushed and styled daily. Powders were sometimes used to absorb oils. Wigs and hair coverings were common. Among older royalty, head coverings also served religious and social purposes. They helped maintain order and appearance. Despite efforts, parasites were common. Lice and fleas did not respect rank. Even royal families experienced itching and discomfort. Combs designed to remove lice were used carefully. Servants inspected hair and clothing regularly. This was not discussed openly. It was simply accepted. Teeth were another concern. Dental care was basic. Toothbrushes did not exist. Instead, people cleaned their teeth using claws, small sticks, or powders made from herbs. Sugar was rare, but tooth decay still occurred. Pain was endured. Dental treatment, when attempted, was painful and risky. Many royals lost teeth early. This affected speech, appearance, and comfort. Illness was closely linked to hygiene beliefs. Bad smells were often thought to cause disease. This idea, known as miasma, shaped behavior. Rooms were aired. Windows were opened briefly. Herbs were burned to cleanse the air. Garbage and waste were removed from living areas, but not always effectively. Castles had limited plumbing. Waste was managed through chamber. Pots. These were emptied by servants. Accidents happened. Odors lingered. Royalty lived with these realities daily. Despite discomfort, complaints were rare. This was normal life. Children of royalty learned hygiene habits early. They were taught to wash hands, to change linen, to avoid cold water. Bathing was treated with caution. Cleanliness meant control, not freshness. Medical advice reinforced these beliefs. Doctors warned against frequent baths. They recommended balance. 2. Much washing was considered dangerous. So, even when royalty could afford water and servants, they chose restraint. Public image mattered. Clothing appeared clean. Hair appeared styled. This created the illusion of hygiene. Visitors saw elegance, not reality. In crowded courts, disease spread easily. Plagues moved through cities and castles. Alike, royalty isolated themselves when illness appeared. They moved to different residences. Quarantine became common. Yet, knowledge remained limited. Many did not understand how illness truly spread. Hygiene practices stayed the same for centuries. Smell was part of life. People accepted it. They adjusted. Strong scents became normal. In this environment, cleanliness was relative. Royalty lived as cleanly as their time allowed. They followed beliefs passed down through tradition. As night approached, servants prepared linen. Hands and faces were washed. Hair was brushed. The day ended with the same careful routines. The body rested, carrying the marks of another day. Hygiene, like everything else in royal life, was shaped by fear, belief, and habit. It was strange to us, but familiar to them. And within these customs, royalty continued to live, rule, and endure behind stone walls and scented air. In medieval royal life, marriage was rarely about love. It was about stability. It was about land. It was about power. For kings and queens, and especially for princes and princesses, marriage was a duty decided long before they were ready. Sometimes, before they could even speak, royal families discussed marriage early. Children were promised to one another as part of political agreements. These promises were written, sealed, and remembered. Feelings did not matter. Personal choice was not expected. A royal marriage was an alliance between families, between regions, sometimes between entire nations. When the time came, the young royal was informed, not asked. Ceremonies were planned. Dates were chosen. Guests were invited. The bride and groom often met for the first time only shortly before the wedding. Sometimes, they did not meet at all until the ceremony itself. Age differences were common. Young girls were married to older men. Young boys were paired with older women. This was accepted. Marriage marked the beginning of a new role. For royal women, marriage often meant leaving home. They traveled far, sometimes to foreign lands where language and customs were unfamiliar. This journey was emotional, but emotions were hidden. A royal bride was expected to remain calm. Tears were seen as weakness. Arrival at a new court meant adjustment, new rules, new servants, new expectations. The bride was watched carefully. Her behavior mattered. Her ability to produce an heir was critical. This pressure was constant. For royal men, marriage brought responsibility. They were expected to protect alliances, to lead households, to continue family lines. Affection was optional. Duty was required. Royal marriages were public. Ceremonies were large and formal. Witnesses filled the space. Everything was recorded, even Private moments were sometimes observed in some courts. The wedding night included witnesses waiting nearby to confirm the marriage was. Complete. Privacy was limited. Intimacy was awkward. Many couples struggled. Love was not guaranteed. Friendship took time. Some never found it. Royal couples often lived separately. They maintained their own chambers, their own routines. They came together when duty demanded. Loneliness was common. Despite this, marriage was praised as honorable. It was presented as success. Royal women were valued for their ability to give birth. Pregnancy was dangerous. Medical care was limited. Childbirth carried high risk. Many royal women died young. Fear surrounded pregnancy. Yet producing heirs was the most important duty. For men, failure to produce an heir caused concern. Pressure grew. Marriages were judged by their results. Love was rarely mentioned. Infidelity occurred. Royal men often took mistresses. This was sometimes accepted. Royal women had fewer freedoms. Their behavior was monitored. Their reputation mattered deeply. Scandals could damage alliances. So silence was expected. Religion shaped marriage. Marriage was considered sacred. Divorce was rare. Unhappy unions were endured. Prayer was encouraged. Suffering was seen as virtue. Royal children grew up watching these marriages. They learned early that marriage was obligation. Romantic love, as we understand it today, was not the goal. Stability was. Some couples developed respect. Some found quiet companionship. Others lived as strangers. Letters were written. Messages passed through servants. Feelings were rarely spoken openly. The bed, like everything else, was political. Sharing a bed did not always mean closeness. It meant duty. Over time, some marriages softened. Shared experiences created familiarity, but many remained distant. Royal life did not encourage vulnerability. Strength was valued. Emotion was controlled. At night, royal spouses lay awake thinking separate thoughts. Surrounded by silence, they carried the weight of expectation. Marriage did not bring freedom. It brought another layer of responsibility, another role to perform. And yet, within these limits, royalty continued. They fulfilled duties. They produced heirs. They maintained alliances. Their personal desires were often set aside. As dawn approached, the castle prepared for another day. Marriage, like all aspects of royal life, was not chosen. It was inherited. And within its structure, royalty learned to live without love, but with purpose. The story continues, moving deeper into the strange and quiet world behind the crown. Power in medieval times was never calm. From the outside, royalty appeared strong and secure. Crowns shone. Thrones stood tall. But behind these symbols, fear lived quietly. Kings and queens understood something deeply. Power attracted danger. The higher a person rose, the more eyes followed. Enemies were not always visible. They hid behind smiles, behind polite words, behind loyalty. This uncertainty shaped daily life. Every visitor was watched. Every gift was inspected. Trust was limited. Poison was one of the greatest fears. Food was tasted, before reaching the royal table. Drinks were examined. Utensils were checked. Still, doubt remained. A single mistake could end a life. Poison worked silently. It did not announce itself. Symptoms appeared slowly. By the time illness was noticed, it was often too late. Royalty lived aware of this risk. They learned to eat carefully. They avoided unfamiliar dishes. They noticed changes in taste or smell. Meals were moments of tension. Assassination was not limited to poison. Blades were hidden. Accidents were arranged. Night attacks were possible. So security was constant. Guards rotated. Shifts. Doors were locked. Passages were monitored. The castle became a controlled space. Yet, no system was perfect. Fear extended beyond physical threats. Political danger was always present. Alliances shifted. Friends became rivals. Words spoken carelessly could cause conflict. A wrong decision could start war. Royalty carried this weight constantly. Sleep was light. Dreams were troubled. Thoughts returned again and again to the safety of the crown. Royal children sensed this fear early. They were warned to be careful. To trust slowly. To observe. Play was supervised. Freedom was limited. This created caution. Some children grew quiet. Others grew anxious. Fear shaped personalities. Religion offered comfort, but also increased pressure. If danger appeared, it was sometimes seen as punishment. Royalty questioned themselves. Had they angered God? Had they failed in duty? This added spiritual fear to physical danger. Illness was another constant threat. Disease spread quickly, even within castles. Plague found its way inside. Royalty isolated themselves when outbreaks occurred. They moved to remote residences. Still, escape was not guaranteed. Doctors offered limited help. Treatments were uncertain. Fear of sickness was deep. King's illness could cause panic. Succession became urgent. The future felt unstable. Queens worried about heirs. Mothers feared for children. Loss was common. Royal families experienced grief quietly. Public displays of emotion were controlled. Mourning followed strict rules. Private pain was hidden. Fear also lived in silence. Many thoughts were not spoken. Doubts stayed inside. Royalty learned to maintain calm. Expressions. They appeared confident even when afraid. This performance was exhausting. Loneliness grew. Who could be trusted? Advisors offered guidance, but motives were unclear. Servants heard everything. Privacy was fragile. Letters were coded. Messages were whispered. Secrets were guarded carefully. Even celebrations carried risk. Large gatherings meant opportunity for enemies. Security increased during events. Joy was measured. Laughter was careful. Power required constant awareness. Some kings became suspicious. They saw danger everywhere. Others tried to ignore fear, but it never fully left. Time did not ease anxiety. Experience only confirmed it. The longer one ruled, the more danger they witnessed. Deaths of rivals Death civilized. Violence was part of life. This created emotional distance. Royalty learned not to grow attached. Loss became familiar. Fear also shaped decision-making. Some choices were made quickly, to avoid hesitation. Others were delayed, to avoid mistakes. Either way, fear influenced action. At night, when the castle grew quiet, fear became louder. The absence of sound allowed thoughts to return. What if tomorrow brought betrayal? What if illness appeared? What if the crown was lost? These questions had no answers. Morning came regardless. Royalty rose and continued. Fear did not stop duty. It walked beside it. The strange truth is this: power did not bring peace. It brought constant vigilance. A crown was heavy, not just in gold, but in worry. As we move forward, we will see how these fears shaped habits, beliefs, and strange customs. For now, the castle stands in quiet tension. Guards remain alert. Candles burn low. And power, never truly at rest, waits for another uncertain day. A medieval king did not wake up freely. Morning began with ritual, not choice. As dawn light touched the stone walls, servants moved quietly through the corridors. Bells rang softly in the distance. The castle stirred. In the royal chamber, guards changed shifts. Doors were checked. Candles were replaced. The king woke, often before he felt rested. Sleep had been light. Dreams faded quickly. There was no time to linger. Servants entered. Curtains were drawn back. The cold air of morning filled the room. Heavy garments waited nearby. Before rising, the king prayed. Religion shaped the start of every day. Prayers asked for guidance, strength, and protection. These moments were quiet, but they carried weight. After prayer, the king was dressed. This took time. Layers were added carefully. Each piece had meaning. Colors signaled authority. Jewelry signaled wealth. A crown or symbolic headpiece completed the image. The body adjusted slowly to the weight. Breakfast was simple: bread, cheese, and drink. The meal was not private. Advisors might already be present. Conversations began early. There was always something to discuss. Messages arrived overnight. Letters were read. News from distant lands was shared. Some news was good. Much of it was not. After the morning meal, the day truly began. Meetings filled the hours. Nobles requested favors. Disputes needed judgment. The king listened carefully. Every decision mattered. A careless word could create conflict. Patience was required. Between meetings, the king attended religious services. Prayer structured the day. Faith offered stability. It also reminded the king of his responsibility before God. Midday meals were larger. Great hall filled again. Servants moved quickly. King ate under watchful eyes. Conversation continued. Even meals were work. After eating, there was little rest. Physical activity followed. Some kings trained with weapons. Others rode horses. Movement was necessary. It prepared the body for war. It also showed strength. Appearance mattered. Weakness was dangerous. In the afternoon, more meetings followed. Documents were signed. Seals were pressed into wax. Alliances were maintained. Problems were managed. Time passed slowly. Fatigue built quietly. Yet, the king remained composed. Servants watched closely. Guards stayed alert. There was no escape. As evening approached, the pace changed. Supper was held. Again. It was public. Guests attended. Music might play softly, but the king remained aware. Security was increased. After the meal, the king might meet privately with trusted advisors. These conversations were important. Secrets were shared. Plans were made. The weight of leadership felt heavier at night. As darkness fell, the castle quieted. The king returned to his chamber. Garments were removed. The crown was set aside. Prayers were spoken. Again, reflection followed. Mistakes were considered. Regrets surfaced. But there was little time to dwell. Sleep waited. Guards took their positions. Servants withdrew. The king lay down, knowing tomorrow would be the same. Another day of responsibility. Another day without rest. This routine repeated. Day after day. Years passed. The body aged. The role remained. Being king was not freedom. It was constant presence. Every moment belonged to the crown. Even alone, the king was never separate from his duty. This was the rhythm of power. Steady, demanding, unforgiving. And yet, within this routine, history was shaped. Decisions made in quiet rooms changed lives far beyond the castle walls. As night settled, the castle breathed softly. The king slept lightly. Morning would come soon, and the cycle would begin again. In medieval royal life, logic and belief lived side by side. Science, as we know it today, did not guide decisions. Instead, signs, symbols, and superstition shaped everyday behavior. Even kings and queens, with all their power, were deeply influenced by invisible forces. Royalty believed the world was filled with meaning. Nothing happened by accident. Every event carried a message. A sudden illness, a broken object, a strange dream. All were seen as signs. Royal courts paid close attention to omens. Birds flying in certain patterns, animals behaving strangely, changes in weather. These observations mattered. Advisors interpreted meaning. Decisions were delayed or rushed based on these signs. Astrology was respected. The movement of stars and planets was carefully studied. Royal births, marriages, and journeys were planned according to the sky. Astrologers held important positions at court. They advised kings on when to act and when to wait. Even warfare was influenced. Battles were sometimes delayed until the stars appeared. Favorable numbers carried power. Certain numbers were considered lucky. Others were feared. Dates were chosen carefully. Some days were avoided completely. Royalty followed these rules quietly. To ignore them felt dangerous. Dreams were taken seriously. A troubling dream could influence the next day's plans. Dream interpreters listened carefully. A dream of falling might suggest weakness. A dream of fire might suggest conflict. Royalty shared dreams cautiously. Not every dream was safe to reveal. Religious belief, mixed with superstition. God was central to life. Prayer guided action. But alongside faith, folk beliefs remained strong. Charms were worn for protection. Small objects, blessed or symbolic, were kept close. They were hidden in clothing or placed near beds. These items offered comfort. Even those who ruled kingdoms sought reassurance. Certain actions were avoided. Walking under specific structures. Beginning tasks at certain times. These habits became routine. Breaking them caused anxiety. Illness increased superstition. When sickness appeared, people searched for meaning. Was it punishment? Was it a warning? Doctors and priests offered different answers. Royalty listened to both. This created confusion. But certainty was rare. Fear filled the gaps. Children of royalty learned these beliefs early. They observed rituals. They memorized rules. Superstition became normal. It was part of education. Court life encouraged tradition. Breaking habit felt risky. Even clothing choices were sometimes influenced by belief. Certain colors were avoided on certain days. Jewelry was selected carefully. Symbols mattered. Animals also carried meaning. Cats, ravens, and horses were watched closely. Their behavior was interpreted. A restless horse could signal trouble. A quiet animal might suggest calm. Royalty did not laugh at these ideas. They respected them. Life felt safer with explanation. Superstition offered order in an unpredictable world. When events could not be controlled, belief filled the space. Power did not remove uncertainty. It increased it. So kings and queens clung to patterns. Routines brought comfort. Repeating actions made the future feel stable. Even small changes were avoided. Travel routes were chosen carefully. Rooms were entered in specific ways. Rituals surrounded important moments, coronations, weddings, treaties. Nothing was left to chance. Yet superstition also limited freedom. Fear of bad luck restricted action. Some opportunities were missed. Some decisions were delayed. But caution felt safer. At night, beliefs grew stronger. Darkness encouraged imagination. Shadows moved. Sounds echoed. Superstition explained the unknown. Royal bedrooms were protected with prayer and charms. Sleep felt safer when rituals were followed. Morning brought relief. Another day survived. Another set of rules obeyed. The strange habits of royalty may seem unusual to us. But in a world without clear answers, they provided comfort. They reduced fear. They gave meaning to uncertainty. As we move forward, we see that power did not remove belief. It depended on it. The crown rested not only on gold, but on faith, habit, and quiet hope. And within these beliefs, royalty continued their careful lives behind stone walls and watching eyes. In medieval royal life, love was rarely the first concern. Duty came before feeling. Marriage was not a private choice. It was a political decision. Kings and queens were expected to strengthen alliances, secure borders, and produce heirs. Emotion was secondary. Royal marriages were arranged early. Sometimes, children were promised before they could speak clearly. Families negotiated details. Dowries were discussed. Territory was exchanged. Two lives were joined for the sake of power. The wedding ceremony was grand. Music played. Crowds gathered. From the outside, it looked romantic. Inside, the couple barely knew each other. Fear and uncertainty often replaced Joy. Queens entered foreign lands. They left family behind. Language changed. Customs felt strange. Loneliness followed. Kings also felt pressure. They were expected to rule, to lead, and to produce an heir. Failure in marriage meant political risk. Children were central to royal relationships, that an heir meant stability. Lack of children meant danger. Women were blamed when pregnancies failed. Illness, miscarriage, or death brought suspicion. Medical knowledge was limited, yet judgment was harsh. Queens lived under constant observation. Every pregnancy mattered. Every birth was watched. Private moments became public concern. Love, when it appeared, was often hidden. Affection was quiet. Public displays were limited. Royal couples learned to perform unity even when connection was weak. Some marriages grew warmer over time. Shared responsibility created respect. Others remained distant. Silence filled. Shared spaces. Extramarital relationships were common. Kings often took lovers. This was accepted quietly. Queens had less freedom. Their actions were controlled. Rumors spread quickly. Reputation mattered deeply. Scandal threatened the crown. Children born outside marriage created complications. They were acknowledged or ignored based on politics. Emotion was managed carefully. Royalty learned to separate heart from role. This created emotional distance. Some rulers felt isolated, others found comfort in routine. Religion influenced relationships. Marriage was seen as sacred. Divorce was rare. Unhappy unions continued. Faith encouraged endurance. Queens prayed for strength. Kings prayed for heirs. Loss affected relationships deeply. Childbirth was dangerous. Many queens died young. Widowhood followed. Kings remarried quickly, not for love, but necessity. Children grew up quickly. They observed cold relationships. They learned that duty outweighed affection. This shaped future generations. Some rebelled quietly. Others accepted tradition. Private letters reveal longing. Words never spoken aloud were written secretly. Emotion existed, but expression was limited. The royal household watched everything. Privacy was rare. Trust was fragile. Even in marriage, loneliness remained. At night, royal chambers felt large and empty. Stone walls did not offer comfort. Yet within this system, small moments mattered. A shared glance, a quiet conversation, a moment of understanding. These moments softened duty. They reminded royalty that they were human. As time passed, some found peace in acceptance. Love became steady, not passionate. Others never did. Marriage remained obligation. The crown shaped relationships. It demanded sacrifice. Emotion was controlled. Desire was secondary. And yet, despite restrictions, hope remained. Hope for stability. Hope for a legacy. Hope that duty might one day bring quiet fulfillment. In the end, royal love was not simple. It was shaped by power, fear, and expectation. And within these boundaries, kings and queens lived their careful lives, balancing heart and crown in a world that demanded both. As medieval life moved forward, time softened everything. Even power. Kings grew older. Queens aged quietly. The crown did not change, but the people beneath it The dot what once felt heavy became familiar. Strangeness turned into routine. The weird life of royalty was no longer strange to those living it. It was simply life. Years passed within stone walls. Seasons came and went. Snow-covered battlements. Spring returned color to gardens. Through it all, royalty remained. Their days followed patterns. Morning prayers, public duties, private worries. Night reflections. The crown rested on tired heads. The early fear of power became steady awareness. Danger never left. But it no longer surprised. Loss was accepted. Change was expected. Royalty learned to endure. History remembers names. Kings, queens, but behind those names were people. They felt loneliness. They felt doubt. They questioned decisions. They wondered what life might have been without the crown. There were moments of peace, quiet walks, soft music, evening light through narrow windows. These moments mattered. They balanced. Responsibility. Memory became important. Royalty thought about legacy. What would remain? A kingdom? A family line? A story told by others? Control faded with age. Younger rulers waited. Power prepared to move on. Death approached quietly, often expected. Sometimes sudden. Funeral rituals followed. The crown passed to another. Life continued. Castles did not mourn. Stones remained. The weird habits, the fear, the belief, the duty, all repeated with new faces. And yet, each ruler was different. Each carried power in a personal way. The strange life of royalty was not just about luxury. It was about endurance. Survival. Balance. In many ways. Modern life is different. Freedom feels larger. Choice feels wider. But pressure remains. Responsibility remains. The medieval crown reminds us that power always has a cost. It shapes behavior. It changes relationships. It isolates. Yet it also creates purpose. Royalty lived between extremes, privilege and fear, respect and loneliness. They learned to live carefully. They learned to move slowly. They learned to speak wisely. At night, when candles dimmed and guards stood silent, peace sometimes arrived. Not loud, not perfect, but enough. Enough to rest. Enough to continue. The weird life of medieval royalty was not glamorous. It was complex. It was human. As this story comes to an end, the castle grows quiet once more. The crown rests. History breathes. And somewhere between memory and silence, the lives of kings and queens fade gently into time, leaving behind lessons, shadows, and a strange, lasting calm.